Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's story is the next installment in the fantastic series that I dropped last night. As ever, please do let us know down below in the comments what you thought. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and a community. And of course, don't forget to hashtag TeamFEAR. Without further ado, let's get into tonight's story, entitled The Hunters Hunted. Let's get straight into that. Lance understood the middle of the afternoon was not the best time to start out on a walk to find help, but also realised that they had no choice. They had no shelter at all, much less the steel doors and the solid concrete walls he had to protect his family last year against the Gwynner. He and his friends were exposed and vulnerable, and he was sure that the creature would be coming after them when night fell. So, they walked as quickly as they could. Teenage boys have a lot of energy, but right now, a lot of it was being used up by fear, a natural fear of being hunted. And Lance suspected that some of it was the supernatural fear and malice that Gwynner projected. As the sun began to sink low behind the mountains, they stopped for a rest. Guys, we need to figure out what we're going to do for the night. Do we stop, make camp, and try to get some rest? Maybe with a couple of people and watch for the night, or do we keep stumbling along in the dark? He asked. I say we keep going, Bobby said as he squatted on a fallen log next to the road. How long do you think the batteries and our flashlights will last? Pete asked. A couple of hours at most, Lance told them. Then we're stumbling around in the dark. Plus, the lights will give away our position to the creature. Lance didn't tell them he could see in the dark perfectly well. That would require more explanations than he was comfortable giving. Tommy asked, what if we only use one flashlight at a time? We might make it through the night, but then all of our flashlights will be out. We'll have to make the rest of the walk by daylight, and I hope we can get to a phone before dark, Lance said. And we'll be making that walk after walking all night too. What do you think, Lance? Paul finally asked. I think we should find ourselves a spot on the side of the road that we can defend and make a camp with a small fire and set watches, he told them. Where did you learn all this? Bobby asked. Lance shrugged and said, I told you, I have a lot of interests. Then, showing an insight he hadn't expected, Pete said, that attack on your dad's wasn't a bear, was it? Every head turned to face him at the question. That's what the game warden said it was. But it wasn't, Pete pressed. Finally sighing, Lance said, No, it was some kind of werewolf creature. I don't think it was a man who becomes a wolf, but something in between the two that is the creature all the time. Do you think it's the same creature? There was almost a tone of accusation in Jeff's voice. I don't think so, Lance said. Why not? Jeff demanded. Because I cut the damn thing's head clean of its body. With what? Bobby asked. Lance picked up the broad axe and lied. With an axe? It fits, Tommy said. He's good with an axe, we all know that. Lance chuckled and said, Anything else? Why was it after you? Why is this one after us? Tommy demanded. Supposedly, the one that attacked me was under the same kind of curse. My grandfather used to warn us kids not to go out in the night or the Gwynner would get us. Is that what that thing is? A Gwynner? Bobby asked. I don't know. I don't know if the one that attacked me was a Gwynner. I know it looked like a wolf who could walk on its back legs and has arms and hands instead of front paws. It turned over my stepmom's car and smashed it to pieces. So it's strong. It also gives off this aura of sheer hatred and malice that cuts right to your gut and nearly paralyzes you with fear. He gave them as much information as he could. Bobby started laughing at some thought. What? Paul demanded. That explains why he hangs around with those two weirdos, Diane and Ted. He has lived through what they fantasize about. Bobby showed a lot more intuitive thinking than Lance expected, even if it was wrong. Shaking his head, he told them, "No, I made friends with them before the subject of the paranormal came up." Lance smiled and told him, "Like I said, they talked to me first. They were nice to me first." Then, looking up at the others, he asked, "So what's it going to be? We find a place off the side of the road to pitch a camp, or do we try to struggle through the night?" Both sounded dangerous, Tommy said, "but I think a camp sounds the safest." He looked around to the group. Only Lance's witcheries gave him some modicum of relief from the effects of fatigue, but that was only with physical exertion. Today had been more emotionally draining than physically, and he was feeling its effects on his mind and not his body. Lance nodded and said, "I could build a fire that won't shine in the night. We just need to find a place with a good cover." "This I gotta see," Tommy said. "A decoder fire?" Paul asked. "Yep," Lance said, nodding his head. "What's a decoder fire?" Tommy inquired. "Watch," Paul told him with a grin. "For now, get with your buddy and find us a lot of small firewood." "Exactly," Lance said, surprised at his teammates' knowledge and willingness to back him up. "This fire is going to burn very hot, so we're going to need a lot of firewood." He hefted the broad axe in his hand and said, "Come on, Bobby, let's find a place to dig a couple of holes." The other boy nodded as they scouted around to find a place that was open enough to make camp, but with plenty of cover surrounding it. After several spots panned out, they finally found one in a small gully that had a stream running out of it. Lance took the axe and started cutting the holes he was going to need in the ground directly under a young oak tree that would dissipate what little smoke the fire would produce. When he was finished, he had a hole about 10 inches across and maybe 1.5 feet deep. Next to it, he had a larger hole, which would suck in air from the smaller one at its base and cause the fire to burn quick and hot and not produce much smoke. As the other boys brought their wood, he began to build a small pile of kindling in the larger hole. Then, using the lighter they'd brought from the wrecked camp, he got it started and began feeding it ever larger pieces of wood into it until he had a good hot fire going. "Won't the Gwyneth see it?" Pete asked. Lance shook his head and said, "We keep the fire low in the ground so it only illuminates the area directly around it. The fire is hot so it'll burn quickly. That's why we need to have lots of firewood. When we break camp tomorrow, we just push the dirt to dug out back in and go on our way." "What about dinner?" Jeff asked. "We got that bread and bologna," Pete said. "Good, I'm starved," Jeff replied. "Well, while I set up the rest of the camp, why don't you guys help yourselves?" Lance said. He had no plans on eating. He knew he could go days without food if necessary and not succumb to hunger. That is, as long as he didn't have to use his witcheries too much. He crossed that bridge when he came to it, though. Mentally, he took stock of their situation. The way he saw things, he had one of 3 choices. The first was to give up and let the Gwyneth take them. That wasn't really an option. The second was to simply come out into the open and not worry about the other boys finding out about his witcheries. That was only a little better than the first option, as it would make life nearly unbearable for him when they got back to school. The third was to continue on the path they were on. Keep hiding his abilities and hope he can keep them all safe. He really was stuck between the devil and the deep blue sea, but for now, he and his friends were safe. It was nearly an hour later, when everyone had settled down with something to eat and drink, that Pete came up to him and sat down. "You didn't eat anything." Lance smiled at him and lied. "If I eat something, it's likely to come up again. I figure it's best not to waste food." "Why? Are you sick?" Lance frowned and said, "No, just scared. Never could tell it by the way you're taking charge. If I let myself break down, then who's going to keep us all safe?" "Why is it your responsibility?" Pete asked. "Because Jeff and Bobby are emotionally compromised. They just lost their dads. I don't know you, Paul, and Tommy enough to make a determination of whether or not I thought you could get us out of here." "That's harsh." "It's reality," and told him. It's not a slight at you, but to my own distrusting nature. He gave the other boy a wonky smile and said, My stepmom tells me that my caretaker instincts are too strong, and that I want to try and fix everything and everybody. Pete nodded and said, I can see that, but there's more. Even as scared as you are, you give off an air of confidence. I don't see it in many grown-ups. It sets you apart from the rest of us. Sometimes, I wonder if you're lonely. That was an observation Lance never expected to hear from his teammate. It showed he had far greater insight than people gave him credit for. He shrugged and said, I can't say that I am. Sometimes it seems like I'm pulled into many situations, directions, but I cope. Thanks for noticing, though. Don't mention it, he said, looking straight ahead. What are we going to do about the fire watch? Lance looked down at his watch and was surprised to see that it was nearly 10 o'clock. He figured that with something in their stomachs and them not on the road, that fatigue would soon overcome the other five's fear and they would start dropping off. I'll tell you what, we'll do 2-hour watches starting at midnight. Each of us watching with a buddy. Bobby and I will take the first watch until 2. You and Tommy can take the 2 till 4 and Paul and Jeff can take the dawn watch. Okay, sounds like a plan. Pete assented. Go inform the others. If that plan is good with everyone, we'll go with it, Lance said. I suggest that everyone else try and get some sleep between now and their watch. What about you? Pete asked. I'm good, he told his friend. I think your stepmom is right, Pete said as he walked off to tell the others the plan. Half an hour later, the food had been put away, and the other 5 were either sleeping or doing their best to not keep their teammates from it by moving around. And that was good for Lance, because as long as they were still and quiet, he could use his witchkin senses to extend his awareness beyond the small circle of their camp. The first thing he noted was a lack of normal animal noises around the lake. It seemed like everything living, everything natural, was holding its breath, waiting to see what the hell creature that had descended upon the abode would do. Who or what would die next? Even the cicadas were silent. Slowly, it filtered out the sounds of his companions' breathing and their heartbeats as he was hearing extended itself into the forest surrounding them. Next, he filtered out the wind and the lapping of the waves of the lake against the shore caused by that wind. Soon, he could nearly see the whole of the lake in his mind's eye. Suddenly, a horrible cry that was 1 part big cat, 1 part human, and 2 parts something the throats of neither could ever make cut through the night, jarring everyone awake. Being knocked from his state of heightened senses, he almost missed the answering call that was pure gwinner, designed to send shivers down the spine of anything that hears it. They came from the opposite directions from their camp, and Lance had a sinking feeling that he and his friends were about to be caught in the middle between the two. What was that? Bobby said, jerking awake next to him. Then, realizing he'd been asleep, he looked at Lance and demanded, Why didn't you wake me up for the start of our shift? Lance lied. Something he'd become too comfortable doing over the last day. I tried to, but you were so out of it, I thought it was best to let you sleep. The answer seeming to mollify him, he then asked, And what was that? The Gwynner, Lance answered. It sounded like 2 of them, Pete said, rubbing his eyes. Lance nodded and said, Yep, I think we just went from a frying pan into a fire. Judges, Target Report 2. Judge, redacted. Notes. Observations of the targets continue to warrant more investigations. Subject McKnight has shown superior survival skills to the average male of his age. The fact that 2 subjects knew how to create a decoder fire is remarkable enough, but the level of maturity McKnight is showing suggests something else. I reiterate my earlier recommendation that he be investigated further by the Academy. The spear of lights that the Coleman lantern cast flickered and flurried off the trees and bushes on the side of the road, making the shadows dance in and out of Donna's vision. The further down if they travelled, the tie to Todd's hand squeezed hers. Denise flanked her and Deborah was on the other side of their little brother. As the roadbed had to follow the natural lay of the land, the trip took longer than the trail that followed to find their mother's body. Donna tried not to think about that as she tried to concentrate on keeping them together, surviving this night and finding help. She practiced breaking down their goals the way their dad had taught them. First get to the car, then get the keys, then come back to the car and then try and drive out of these godforsaken mountains. She had no idea how long they'd been walking when they finally caught sight of their parents' new station wagon, parked in a little clearing beside the road. Seeing the car, Donna mentally ticked off one of the goals from her list. They weren't surprised to find it locked. There was no way that her dad would go off and leave the new car unlocked on the side of the road. He was too practical of a man for that kind of thing. "Okay, now what?" Todd asked. Donna forced herself to smile. "Now we go to Dad's car keys. Also look around the camp for something to eat maybe. And then we head back here. And then we put our lives in Donna's hands as she drives us out of here," Denise added. "You want to drive?" Donna challenged her sister. For just a moment, she thought that Denise was going to take her up on it, but in the end, she backed down. Shaking her head, she said, "No, I won't argue with that. You're the best driver of the three of us." "4," Denise said. "But I hope it doesn't come to Todd driving. That would mean the rest of us were hurt or worse." "Don't think about that," Donna warned. "Think about staying alive and our goals." "And they are?" Denise demanded. "First to get to the car, then to go get the keys, then get back here, then drive out. Take one thing at a time. Don't let it overwhelm us." "It sounds easier when you break it down like that," Todd said, and she thought she detected a bit of admiration in his voice. "Okay, do we need a rest or do we go from here?" Deborah asked. "Up to you guys." Donna let them vote. There was no need to push them right now. They knew the goals now, and the other three looked at each other. "Get the keys now," Todd said. "Now," Denise added. "No reason to wait," Deborah said. Donna nodded. As Dad would say, there's nothing to it but to do it. Squeezing Todd's hand a little, she started down the path leading to their campsite. It only took about 10 minutes to pick their way along the trail. The night sounds of the woods were eerily quiet as they stepped out into the wrecked campsite. Looking around in the soft yellow glow of the lantern, the sight was less stark, less intense as much of the blood and gore was lost in the shadows. Todd let go of her hand and walked over to where the torn piece of tent covered their dad's body. She watched as he fought back tears lifted in the now blood-stained cloth. He rummaged around for a couple of moments before standing up, holding the keys out for them all to see. "Another one down," he said grimly as he let the cloth cover the dad once again. Donna nodded and gave him a small thumbs up. Then, looking around, she said, "Look for anything useful in case something else happens." Then they set about the grim task of looting their own campsite. Luckily the cooler hadn't been touched, nor the food safe where they stored bread and such. Finally, Denise stood up and said, "I think this might come in handy." She held up a can of fuel oil. "For the lantern." "Good thinking," Donna told her. "Now let's get back to the car." They all nodded and in grim procession made their way back. This time, it was going to be a bit easier as they knew the route a little bit better. The dancing shadows were not quite so frightening. So far things had gone well enough, and Donna was beginning to believe they may just actually make it out of this. As she slid into the driver's seat of the station wagon. Forcing her nerves to calm, she reached over and pulled on the seatbelt, like her daddy had showed her. He made all the kids wear the seatbelt, but didn't wear one himself. The thought brought a hitch to her throat. "Everybody buckled up?" she asked, swallowing it. Getting 3 nods, she put the Ford LTD into reverse and eased it out of the parking space. The car was huge, and it was like trying to back a truck, but she managed to get out onto the road. Denise looked over from the passenger seat and said, "Lights?" "Huh? Headlights," That is, unless you plan on driving out here in the dark." Donna nodded and pulled the knob to turn on the lights, shifted it into drive and gave it a little gas. The instinct to floor it and get them the hell out of there fought with her fear of crashing the car on too tight a turn, or running it off into one steep drop-off that cut too far into the road bend for her comfort. "Just calm down, Donna," Denise encouraged her. "We're on the last goal, driving out of here. You can do it." Surprised and comforted by the support from her sister, she focused on the road ahead of them. "What time do you think it is?" she asked. "I don't know. I left my watch back at camp," Todd said. "It seems like hours since the sun went down. I'd say something near midnight," Deborah said. "Donna!" Todd yelled as a huge form leapt down from a ridge that ran alongside the road and landed directly in front of them. Standing up, it screamed into the air, some animalistic call that sent shivers down Donna's spine. It stood nearly 9 feet tall and looked like Bigfoot from the $6 Million Man, except his skull was more conical, and it had a bare snout. Pinned in the car's headlights, the long claws on its hands, and the mouth full of teeth flashed deadly white. The cabin of the station wagon erupted into a cacophony of sound as the other 4 children panicked around her. And for just a second, Donna started to brake the car, but then an idea struck her. She hit the gas and ploughed into the creature, and its knees hitting it with so much force that it swept its feet out from under it, tumbling it across the roof of the wagon and then off to the side. It was a good idea, but it was too much speed, and Donna lost control as she took a turn on the road beyond the creature too fast, and the car careered into the side of the mountain that had been cut away to make the road, bounced back across the road and off the edge. For a sickening moment, the car was suspended in the air as the tyres spun freely and the engine revved before it crashed into the tops of a couple of large oak trees. The sounds of the metal creaking and limbs snapping filled the air as the car tumbled through the trees until it came to a bone-jarring stop at the base of one of the oaks, headlights facing the ground. Suspended by her seatbelt, Donna looked around as her forehead throbbed and was slick with blood where it had impacted the large green steering wheel. Denise was suspended in her seatbelt, looking scared at the ground below them. "Anyone seriously hurt?" she asked. "I think my arm's broke," Todd said as he fought back tears of pain. "I smell gasoline," Deb said. And then she quickly added, her voice becoming more panicked. "And smoke. We need to get out of here," Donna said, pulling on the driver's door handle and then kicking it open with her left foot. "Deb, can you help Todd get his seatbelt loose?" "I got him," her sister called. "But climbing down isn't going to be easy with a busted arm." "You and Denise can hand him down to me," she said, calling out of the door and then lowering herself to the ground from there. It took several minutes to get them all out of the car and to a safe distance away. Donna was surprised when Denise went back into the car for the lantern, which by some miracle was not broken. Setting it and the can of fuel down, she looked at them and said, "What happened?" "I ran it over," Donna replied, "but I didn't keep control of the car." "You probably saved us," Todd said. "Huh?" Deborah asked. "How so?" "There was no way that she could stop in time to hit it. Even if she did, what would we do? Drive backwards down this old road? That thing could have peeled the roof of the car back like a can of sardines." "I hadn't thought of it that way," Deborah answered. Boom! Whatever fire that smelled finally hit the gasoline. It was a spectacular fireball that engulfed the body of the 2 trees and started lapping up the hillside. Donna worried that it had started a forest fire, and she hoped that the weather had been wet here as it had been at home lately. "Come on, let's get out of here." "What about Todd's arm?" Denise asked. "Let me see," she said to her 10-year-old brother, who suddenly looked a lot younger as he fought back a pain and tears. Probing it gently, she couldn't find any jagged punches to his skin or even protrusions or knots under the flesh. "If it's broken, I don't think it's that bad. Better splint it and get moving." "Splint it?" Todd asked. "That's what they do on television," Donna told him. "Do you know how to make a splint?" he asked warily. 2 stiff sticks tied along either side of your arm to keep it straight," she said. "What are we going to use to tie it off?" Deb asked. Todd had already sacrificed his underwear, and the rest of the clothing we saved was in the car. We'll have to wait until we get somewhere we can find something to tie it off. In the meantime, be looking for something to use as splints, Donna ordered. Yes, ma'am, Denise said, giving her a mock salute. Donna just smiled as they began walking around the gully, looking for a place that wasn't too steep for Todd to climb back up the road with a bad arm. In the distance, she heard the creature scream into the night, and then another answered it from the opposite direction. This was not good. After action judge's report. Judge redacted. Notes. Both knees of the specimen, as well as the right shoulder, injured from impact with a 1978 Ford LTD, weighing over 2 tons and 35 miles an hour. Still, the specimen seems to be only angered by its injuries, and not much slowed. However, more concerning is that both specimens have challenged and answered one another. The result of the conflict over prey may lead to a valuable data. Lance watched as the others slowly gathered around the fire, eyes and ears alert for any sound in the night. After about 5 minutes, there was a loud explosion and then 2 cries of challenge again. "What the hell was that?" Bobby asked. "I'm not sure," Lance told him, "but I think I'll climb up the tree and see what I can see in the distance. It sounded like an explosion. If it is, people may need our help." He stood and went to the tree. "Lance, when and if we get out of this situation, I swear, I'm going to nominate you a fucking hero of the year," Pete said. "Here we are with limited light, limited defenses, and a creature out there who breaks people in half, and you want to go help somebody else too?" Then, as if realizing he may have gone too far, he looked over at Jeff and Bobby. Sheepishly, he added, "Oh, sorry guys." "No problem," Jeff replied. "Understood," Bobby told him. "You going to turn down somebody in trouble?" Lance asked as he scrambled up the poplar tree. "Man, we're in trouble," Pete protested. "Yes, we are. But we never know what we might get out of combining our resources," Lance said as he looked out from the tree. What he saw was smoke and a fire a couple of miles away. He wasn't sure what caused it, but he was sure it was man-made. "Look, if you guys promise to lay low and don't run off, I'll go check on it." "Not by yourself," Bobby protested. "I'll go with you." Lance shook his head as he climbed down the tree and then dropped to the ground. He pulled the .44 automag from his pants pocket and handed it to Jeff. "I'm not going to leave you helpless. If that monster shows up, throw to safety and try to make your shots count. Just be careful where you point it. It'll blow a hole through the 3 of us." "And you're going to need it," Jeff protested. "I've got my broadaxe," he replied. "Now here, let me show you how to use it." He proceeded to show the other boy how to turn off the safety on the hand cannon he was leaving. He showed him how to chamber a round and warned him that it would kick like a mule and not to take off the safety unless the creature showed up. Most importantly, don't point it at anything you don't intend to kill, and keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to kill it. Be aware of what's behind it. You don't want to kill one of our friends by accident. Finally, he was satisfied that the other boy would at least not hurt someone else with a gun. Hopefully, that is. And hefted the axe and moved out of their makeshift camp. And once he was clear of the camp, he stopped and really listened. He fought the instinct to run his fingers past his hair. Instead, he focused on the sounds, looking for something that sounded human. "Can we get him up here?" A girl's voice said something in the distance. "I think so," another answered in a voice that sounded nearly identical to the first one. Swinging his head back and forth, he was able to pinpoint their location somewhere ahead of their own encampment. Looking out in that direction, he strained his eyes in the dark. Slowly, he began to see deeper and deeper into the darkness. As his vision shifted into the infrared spectrum, he could see the lake losing its heat to the cool night air. He could see the warm bodies of several animals that were close to him. In the distance, though, he saw a roaring inferno. It looked like part of the forest was on fire. Hefting the axe, he took off in that direction at a ground-devouring pace as he zigzagged along the road to help him pinpoint the girls' voices, catching snippets of their conversation. It sounded like they had someone hurt and they were trying to help him out of a hole somewhere. Travelling at least a couple of miles in a matter of minutes, he started hearing something else. The low grunts and huffs of some kind of animal just beyond them, and it sounded like it was tracking them. The situation was quickly becoming a foot race. He rounded a corner where the mountain road sat on the ledge with a 30-foot cliff rising up on one side and a drop-off about 50 feet on the other. A 30-foot sphere of soft yellow light was bobbing in the distance. He couldn't see beyond them as the light was blocking his vision, but he could hear heavy steps of something closing in with them from the other side. Rushing forward, he burst into the sphere of the 4 walkers, light and then out of it along the road. "Run!" he shouted to them, hoping they would follow his directions. "It's right behind you!" His sudden appearance and disappearance, along with his warning, had the desired effect. They took off at a dead run in that direction from which he came. He didn't get much time to look at them, but they seemed to be 4 kids about his age, 3 girls and a boy. And then they were all dressed in swimming clothes, skidding to a stop in front of the creature stalking them. He realised that it wasn't another Gwynner. It looked more like a Bigfoot crossed with a bear and given a mouth full of too sharp and too many teeth. He looked like he was favouring his right arm, and he walked with an odd gait that suggested his knees hurt him. "Hey there, big fella." He hefted an axe in his hand. "I really don't want to dance with you, but if you keep after those kids, we're going to fight." A flash of movement caught his attention down in the gully next to the monster. It was a guy with what looked like a high-powered rifle, but he slipped below the rim of the road so that Lance couldn't see anymore. He started to call out to the guy when the monster roared and charged him, claws first. The first thing Lance noticed was that its swipes were aimed to catch him from behind and pull him closer. Lance planned on getting closer, but hopefully not caught in one of those nasty-looking claws. Holding the axe at the ready, Lance danced, dodged, and sidestepped at least 2 attacks from those claws aimed at his head. The creature was fast, at least as fast as the Gwynner, and it was everything his enhanced reflexes could do to stay out of their reach, which meant that he didn't get an opening to strike. Suddenly the creature leapt backwards nearly 20 feet and stood there bouncing on its feet like a boxer. Then it growled once and screamed as it leapt at him, all 4 sets of claws pointed in his direction. For an instant, Lance found himself so surprised by the tactic that he nearly didn't get away in time. The creature managed to land a couple of claws on him that sliced his shirt in half. With a sense of relief, Lance realised that his durability, did apply to this one. That fit his theory that the Gwynner he fought back in Bon Travel could hurt him so easily because it was a lying curse from his ancestor, Captain Sheridan McNaughton, and therefore tied to his blood. This thing's claws hurt, and the kinetic force of the attack sent him spinning, but they only left scratch-like welts along his skin that burned like fire. Not the deep flesh-parting wounds the Gwynner did. As it recovered from its leap, Lance danced in with the broad axe and delivered a powerful overhand strike to the back of the creature's leg. He felt the blade bite deep into the skin and bone, and when he yanked it free, the monster pivoted on its good leg and backhanded him. The blow from the fist the size of his head caught him square in the ribs and slammed him backwards into the side of the mountain. Lance shook his head, trying to clear it of stars and lights as the creature cried once more into the night. Sliding down the wall, he caught his feet just as the monster leapt for him. Feet first, Lance rolled forward between the legs and came up just in time to see the figure in the gully raise a rifle and fire where he'd just been seconds before. Oh crap! Now there's somebody shooting at me. Got to end this fast. Coming out of his roll, he leapt forward again right as the shooter stuck his head out to take another shot. Lance lashed out with his hand in midair, snagged the rifle from the would-be sniper, then tucked and rolled as he hit an early blooming blackberry patch. As he came to his feet, he heard a scream of rage from the monster, then a scream of fear that ended abruptly with a sound of crushing bone and tearing flesh. He muttered under his breath, "Missed me." Then He quickly picked his way in a direction the three girls had taken the boy. He got flashes of pain, hatred, hunger off the wounded beast and figured it was going to spend a while devouring its grisly meal. It took him nearly half an hour to catch up with the group of kids. Approaching from behind them, he called into the darkness, "I'm coming behind you. I'm not going to attack you. I want to talk." He could see the four teens pick up their pace as they discussed what to do under their breath in voices they evidently hoped Lance couldn't hear. "What do we do?" the boy asked. "I don't know," Deb said. "Do you think that monster can mimic human sounds?" "There's a difference between mimicking and stringing a list of words together to make sense," Lance called out. "My name is Lance McKnight, and I'm here with another group that was attacked. The creature that attacked us killed the dads of two of my group. We're trying to walk out of here without getting killed or eaten." Lance watched them as they looked at each other. Finally, the boy said, "It's your call, Donna. You haven't let us down yet." "She crashed a car," one of the girls protested. "And if she hadn't, we'd be monster shit tomorrow morning," the boy defended the one named Donna. She, on the other hand, stopped and turned backward, saying, "Okay, come out with your hands over your head." Lance noticed a large cut above her right eye and the bruising that had begun. Raising over his head the rifle and the axe he'd somehow managed to not lose in the fight, he picked up his pace and entered the circle of light of the Coleman lantern. "Like I said, my name's Lance. We heard an explosion. I came to investigate." "How many are with you?" Donna demanded. "Counting me, 6, all boys," Lance answered honestly. "How many guns do you guys have?" Todd asked. "Counting this one, 2. I took it from some guy who was shooting at me while I was trying to lead that thing chasing you away." Lance lied. He couldn't tell them that he actually fought it. "It looks like you tangled with it pretty good," Donna said, seeing through his ruse. "What makes you think that?" he asked. "You've got scratch marks on your chest and side. Your shirt is neatly cut into ribbons and there's blood on the axe." I snuck up behind it and chopped at its legs and ran," he said. "And then this guy started shooting at me, so I led it around to him, snatched his gun and let the beast get him. That distracted him long enough for me to get away and find you guys." The story at least sort of sounded plausible. Suddenly, Lance understood how Steve Austin supposedly felt. "So, how far behind you is it?" the boy asked. "I think we're far enough away that if we hurry, we can get back to our camp and hide until the sun is up." Somewhere back toward the boys' camp, Lance heard the Gwynner howl out of a challenge. Behind them, the other beast answered. He watched as the other 4 shivered at the sound. "There are 2 of them," the boy said. "We think so," Lance answered. "Now, can I put my hands down? I promise you, I'm not here to hurt you." "Go ahead," the girl who was evidently named Donna said. Putting his hands down, he got a chance to look at the rifle he'd taken. Damn thing looked like an elephant gun, and if the round stuck in the sling were any indication, he guessed he was right. The rounds in it had to be at least as big around as his middle finger, and glancing over at the axe, he could see it was coated in a thin slime of dark red blood, through which the edge of the axe was gleaming. Looking back down the road, he asked, "Do you mind if we keep walking? We're heading toward the camp, which is only a couple of miles down that road." "What kind of camp?" one of the girls asked. "Primitive, but we have a decode of fire. You'll at least be warm." "What's a decode of fire?" Todd asked. "It's an underground fire that won't give away our position," he answered. "We've got some food, but not much." "What kind of food?" Todd asked. "Mainly bologna and bread. It's not much, but it keeps us from going hungry." "We had food in the car," another girl said. "Look, can you at least give us some names? I know Todd and Donna." "Deborah," one of the girls said. "Denise," the other answered. "Triplets, I take it?" All 3 nodded as they set off down the road back towards camp. It took just under an hour to cover the distance Lance had covered in a matter of minutes on his own. The whole trip back, he kept his hearing tuned in both directions to see if they were about to be attacked. As they entered a small cove near the camp, a A sudden splashing caught his attention. "Douse the light!" he whispered. "What?" Denise asked. "Douse the light if you don't want to give away our position," he whispered as the girl turned down the light of the lantern. "What is it?" Todd asked. "Look, out there, in the middle of the cove," he said in a low breath. Turning to look in that direction, he indicated. They could see the wolf-like form of the Gwynner wading across the cove in the direction of the other beast. The half-moon illuminated just enough to make out a general shape, but no details of the werewolf-like creature. "What is it?" Donna whispered. "I don't know what anybody else calls it, but I call it a Gwynner. One attacked my family back in October." "What happened to it?" Todd asked. "I cut its head off with an axe," he told the boy. "Now come on, let's get back to camp and you guys can get a little sleep. We'll be heading out in the morning and you're going to need to be fresh." "Would it not come out in the daylight?" Denise asked. Then, realizing what she'd asked and what had happened to her family, she knew that she'd answered her own question. "Shh," he told her as they crept as quietly as they could around the cove. Lance didn't relax at all until there was a corpse of trees between them and the lake. Half an hour later, Lance had led them through the trees until he could hear the sleeping sounds of his teammates, and softly he called out, "Jeff, you still awake?" "Lance?" Jeff answered. "Yeah." "We thought that the one on this side was getting closer, and we'd have to run. But it heard that other one scream, and it answered it before it tore off through the woods, like a hound after a rabbit. We're coming up into camp. Don't shoot us." "We?" he asked. "I found somebody who was attacked by the other creature." Lance heard the safety being clicked into place on the auto-mag and relaxed slightly. "Come on in." Lance showed the 4 survivors how to get into the small clearing around the gully in which they'd made the camp, and made some quick introductions. "Now, I think everyone needs to get some sleep." "What about you?" Jeff asked. "I'm too wired to sleep right now. I'll sit up with the next watch until the adrenaline starts to die down in my system." "What happened? Where did you get that rifle?" "Oh, long story. But in essence, somebody was shooting at me. I didn't like it, so I pointed the other monster towards them and let it eat its fill." "Lance!" Jeff protested. "Trust me on this, Jeff. This guy, he was out to kill me. All I did was lead the damn thing back to him and take away his gun." "Is it another Gwynner?" Jeff asked. Lance shook his head as he sat down by the glowing hole in the ground. "No. This thing looked like a Bigfoot with a bare snout and too many teeth. We saw the Gwynner crossing the cove in the lake on its way back. I think there's going to be a huge ruckus sometime before dawn, and we'll have to deal with what's left." After Action Judge's report. Judge redacted. Notes. Huntmaster, name redacted, was killed in this action. We're still waiting on the Academy to return with information on this Lance McKnight. Pre-strike, the specimen was attacked by a teenage boy named Lance McKnight with an axe. McKnight showed remarkable agility, durability, strength, and speed as he managed to shake off at least 2 direct hits and then nearly sever the specimen's leg at the knees. Huntmaster, name redacted, sought to intervene and fired at McKnight with his Winchester Model 70 African rifle, and missed. McKnight then goaded the specimen into attacking and lured him on top of the Huntmaster, name redacted, while stealing the Huntmaster's rifle. I cannot be more clear. The Academy must give us more information on Lance McKnight, or this hunt will be for naught. The data we collected so far is of little value as it's been contaminated by possible Witchkin interference. Recommend eliminating McKnight with extreme prejudice. Specimen 1, the Gwynner, as Lance McKnight called it, or Dogman, as it's known colloquially, waded ashore on the other side of the cove. Its senses told it that there was prey to be had here, and that one of the bear knockers was 2. It had been a long time since it had fought a bear knocker. They were big, strong and fast, and with as many weapons of war as it had itself. As it moved along the gully beneath the road, it caught a whiff of the man blood and other more interesting toys and things. It also smelled the bear knocker, and if the kill was the bear knocker's, it would be best to wait until it had finished its meal. It would be satiated then, its senses less sharp and its reactions sluggish. Behind it could sense its shadow, the manling that followed it, watched it kill and seemed to judge it in some way. The Gwynner had long ago learned to ignore the manling. That it was not a threat, nor was it going to interfere with its kills. Growling slightly at the brief thought of killing and eating the manling, it turned its attention back to the bear knocker. It sat down on its haunches and waited, picking nits and nuts from its fur. The half moon in the sky had already begun to retreat towards the mountains where the bear knocker finished its meal. He could hear it settle in to rest and perhaps lick its own wounds. As the Gwynner realised that some of its blood smell came from the bear knocker, it was wounded as well. The Gwynner nearly growled in anticipation. False dawn was gleaming across the east when the Gwynner judged that the bear knocker was well asleep and sluggish and slow from its meal. Rising carefully, it stealthily made its way along the gully towards its target. It noted several manling scents on the road above, but they had long since passed. It would have to backtrack when it was finished with the bear knocker and see how many of the manlings were left for a meal. Peering over the tops of the blackberry patch, the Gwynner watched as the bear knocker settled beneath an outcropping of rock at the side of a gully to sleep off its meal. And without its usual cry of defiance, the Gwynner charged through the blackberry bush and thorns and was nearly on top of the bear knocker before it opened its eyes. But the bear knocker proved to be faster than the Gwynner expected, and its strike to the other creature's throat was blocked when it ducked its head. It wasn't all for naught as the Gwynner's claws came away with a large chunk of the bear knocker's face and parts of its nose. The bear knocker roared and then rolled to its side to get clear of any other attacks as it shambled to its feet. Pressing its advantage, the Gwynner struck again, this time leaping onto the bear knocker's back and biting into the heavily muscled neck, trying to break its spine. The blood was dark and sweet, and the Gwynner wanted more as it growled loudly and shook its head, tearing away any chunks of flesh and muscle. Standing, suddenly, the bear knocker ran backwards into the wall of the gully, pinning the Gwynner against the wet, rocky surface. Then, twisting in place, it wiped the Gwynner from its back and followed through with a powerful swipe of its own claws that caught the other beast in the side of its muzzle, knocking loose several teeth. While the Gwynner was rolled against the rock wall, the bear knocker roared in defiance at it. The Gwynner caught its balance and howled back as the two began to circle each other. The bear knocker was wounded, both by the wound the manling had left and by the Gwynner's claws and teeth as well. The Gwynner was wounded also by the manling and now by the bear knocker's blows, but it was now a contest of grit to see which one of them had the most fight left in them. Matching howl for roar, they charged at each other. The clash of their massive bodies against each other was accompanied by a flurry of claws, strikes and bites. Both inhumanly strong, they tore up huge chunks of ground in the gully as their claws sought to push the other away. Finally, the Gwynner got the claws of its good arm positioned on the lower abdomen of the bear knocker and twisted around behind the beast, and with a quick rip upward, it opened the bear knocker's torso from its navel to its sternum. It was a soft plop as the intestines began to slide out of its body. The bear knockers suddenly found itself trying to hold in its own guts as its lifeblood began pouring from its body. It toppled forward onto the moist earth as it died a slow and painful death. The Gwynner threw back its head and screamed a howl of victory into the night air. This kill was his. This place was his, and he held it by the most primal of all trials, tooth and claw. After action judge's report, judge redacted. Notes. The question of the most effective combatant has been answered. Both combatants had been injured in previous encounters but were still in fighting form. Specimen 1 however, challenged and killed Specimen 2 in an unscripted fight. Specimen 2 is slated to be removed to Academy research site for autopsy. In the meantime, there is a matter of 10 teenagers that must be addressed. It is my recommendation that Specimen 2 be allowed to finish its job. The Gwynner's howls echoed across the valley and lake as the morning sun was just now turning the night sky purple behind the eastern mountains, waking Lance from a light doze. "Well, that answers that question," he said softly, standing up where Paul and Jeff were still on their watch. "You should get some more sleep," Paul said. "You were up and moving a lot last night." "I'm fine," Lance said, sitting up. Then, feeling a deep growling in the pit of his stomach, he added, "I am, however, hungry." "There's a sandwich left over from last night," Jeff said, rooting through a pack and handed him a somewhat stale and soggy bologna sandwich. Taking it, Lance nodded and said, "Thanks." "What's the plan for today?" Paul asked. "We let them sleep just a little longer. Then we put out the fire and head out of this valley and find a phone." Paul nodded and said, "I'll see to fixing some breakfast for everybody. The sooner we can get up and moving, the sooner we can get to that phone." He looked off into the direction of the how, his face reflecting the same worry that Lance had. By the time the sun was up and the sky was visible, Lance's worry became much more acute as he looked out to the direction from which the Hows and the Howard kids had come from. He could see smoke bellowing up from a growing forest fire. Groaning about general unfairness of the universe, he turned back to the group and said, "We've got a new problem." "The fire?" Donna asked. "Yes, and it looks like it's moving in this direction," he told them. "We're going to have to hurry so it doesn't catch up with us and block the road out. We're lucky the wind is calm and there's been some rain lately, so it's not spreading too fast. But as more and more of that smoke gets in the air, it's going to be harder for us to breathe." Noting that Todd was still cradling his arm, Lance asked him, "How's the arm?" "It's sore. I've got a little knot coming up on the site where it hurts." He looked at Peter and asked, "Can you rig him a sling and splint?" The other boy nodded and said, "I think so." He looked over at Todd and said, "Come here, let me take a good look." Todd looked over at his sisters and then went back over to Peter so he could look at it and probe. Finally he said, "If it's broken, it's what my mum calls a green stick break. The bone's not completely broken, it's just cracked and probably hurts like thunder." He started looking around the camp. Finding a couple of long sticks, he looked over at Lance and asked, "What happened to your shirt?" "He snuck up behind the thing chasing us and put an axe in its leg," Todd said. Lance was glad that at least one person bought his story. "He says that it scratched him." Peter gave Lance a hard look before telling him, "In that case, give me the ripped parts of your shirt." Lance finished tearing the strips loose and handed them to the other boy. He smiled as Peter began to make a splint for Todd. He then tied two thin pieces together to make him a sling. Patting the arm, he said, "This should help you. Keep it out of the way." Afterward, they all wolfed down about half the bologna and bread they had left and washed it down with water from the canteens. After refilling the canteens with water from the stream, they set out for the gravel road, heading out to the mountains and hoping for the best. The first thing Lance noticed was that there was a lot more movement in the bushes, and occasionally he'd get a flash of a white towel or fur-covered antlers. More than once, deer would nearly leap the breadth of the road in front of them, or family of raccoons would waddle across. He could sense the fright in their minds as they were fleeing the twin threats of the Gwynner and the fire. He was reminded of an old Bugs Bunny and Tasmanian Devil cartoon. "We're seeing a lot of animals all of a sudden," Denise said. "I'd say they're trying to get away from the fire," Bobby replied. Lance just nodded as they continued to pick up their way down the mountain roads that were both blessing and a curse. The roads could be steep enough to require the RV to drop to second gear to climb, so they were draining to walk up and then down. At the same time, they put a shield between them and the fire they were fleeing. The air in the valleys was still pure and sweet and gave them a relief from the smoke they had to breathe on the hilltops. Finally, they reached a long valley that the road cut through lengthwise. Tall, old-growth oak and maple trees lined either side of the road, their buffs forming a green archway above it. Thick bushes of privets, wild azaleas, and blackberry created a tangled undergrowth that seemed designed to make a traveller stick to the road. It was near noon when he entered the valley, and Lance felt that they made good progress. But something about those buffs, about the way they dappled sunlight played on the road, about the way they created a deep web of cool shadows, set his mind to the first time it saw the Gwynner up close under the canopy of trees growing next to the Perdido River in Bontravel. Whereas the cool air was welcome to the 10 weary travellers, Lance found himself on high alert. "What say we drop back for 10, have some sandwiches and rest for a minute?" Donna suggested. Lance started to suggest that they not, but couldn't really find a reason beyond his own paranoia, which he knew came from his experience with these creatures. "Let's find a place where we can see both sides of the road then." "Why?" Deborah asked. He smiled at the oldest girl and said, "Because I want us to have room to scatter if that thing shows up." Sighing, he stopped a minute and then realised that he had not informed the Howards of their plan of the Gwynner should surprise them. "Sounds reasonable," Todd said. As if he'd read Lance's mind, Peter said, "I guess we'd forget to cover up some things before we set out. We're on a buddy system. Every one of us has a buddy to stick to and help watch out for. If we get surprised, we're supposed to split up and run in different directions and try to come back together somewhere up the road." "Who came up with this idea?" Deborah demanded. "Lance," Bobby said, "but we agreed to it." "I'm not saying it's not a good idea," the blonde girl replied, "but I want to know where everyone is before I agree to splitting up." "It can only follow one group at a time," Lance said. "My goal is to keep it busy enough to give the rest of you a chance to get away, and then climb a tree until it goes away, frustrated." "How do you know it can't come up the tree with you?" Todd asked. "That's why I've got an axe." "You seem to know a lot about these things," Denise said. A faint accusatory tone echoed in her voice. "The one chasing us now? Yes. I killed one last year when it attacked my family." "The one that attacked you? I've never seen or heard of before." "So these creatures are after you?" Denise asked. There it was, out in the open, what Lance had been waiting for. "Not that I know of. The one that I killed last year was supposed to be a curse on my family." "I don't believe in curses," the girl said flat out. "You have that prerogative," Lance told her. "But as for me, I didn't. And I bet if I would have asked you before yesterday if you believed in Bigfoot or werewolves, you'd have probably told me the same thing." "So you don't think this thing is after you personally?" Out of nowhere, Bobby shoved Lance hard to the side. Bam! The sound of a gunshot echoed through the air as a bullet blasted a large hole out of one of the trees on the other side of the road. Looking over, Lance saw a man trying to chamber another round of a gun, like the one he took away from the sniper last night. Dropping to one knee, he took quick aim and fired the rifle he was carrying. Bam! The gunshot roared inside the tunnel of trees as the bullet tore through the man's chest, ripping flesh and internal organs out the back. The recoil was tremendous, almost knocking Lance off his feet. He knew he was going to have a bruise from that kick. The man who had shot at them toppled over, dead before he hit the ground. Before the ringing in the ears died down, the Gwynner came crashing through the bushes up ahead, howling in rage. Much to Lance's surprise, his 5 teammates stepped between the Gwynner and the girls. Whatever weapons they had handy, Jeff was throwing the safety of the automag and pointing it at the Gwynner. The gun barked in Jeff's hands 3 times. Bah, bah, bah. The first round slammed into the Gwynner's chest, giving it pause. The second round was high and to the right. The third was into the tree canopy as the gun climbed. The creature screamed once, and from the odour that followed just a few moments later, at least one person lost control of their bladder. Chambering a new round in the Winchester, Lance swung the gun around to take aim, but the Gwynner was on top of him before he could pull the trigger. In a single action, it tried to sweep the gun from his hands, but Lance hung onto it tight and fired once as he was being swung around. The elephant round caught in the hips as it blew out half of what, on a human, would have been its butt cheek. It howled in pain again as it followed the arc of where it had tossed Lance. He bounced once off a limb high above the road and then landed flat on his back, sliding in the river gravel. For long seconds he lay there, trying to get his breath, unable to focus his thoughts or his will until the sounds of gunfire and terrified screaming brought him back to his senses. Sitting up, he noticed that the rifle's barrel had been twisted and bent by the Gwynner's strength. Tossing it aside, he saw his team and the Howard scattering. Poor Bobby had a deep gash in his shoulder and neck, and it was bleeding heavily. Todd was kneeling over one of his sisters who was holding her stomach, blood erupting from between her fingers. The look on the 10-year-old's face was worrisome. He was about to do something stupid that was going to get himself killed. Gaining to his feet, Lance charged the Gwynner from behind with everything he had. In a flash, he covered the intervening yards and slammed his shoulder into the Gwynner's right knee. A referee would call it a clipping, but he figured his coach would forgive him. He was rewarded with a sound of breaking bones as the Gwynner spun down on its now broken leg. It did manage to get a couple of claws on him that left long, painful scratch marks on his back. These were deeper than the other creature's claws, and he could feel blood begin to seep, if not flow, from them. Suddenly, Jeff charged forward with the auto mag. At nearly point-blank range, he fired 3 shots into its head. Bam, bam, bam! Lance watched as one of the bullets passed through its right eye, into its brain case, and out the back of its skull to kick up some of the gravel. The creature was still squirming on the ground, as if the wound was trying to close up around it and heal. Lance wasn't having any of that. Dancing around to the other side, where his axe lay, Lance grabbed the handle and stepped in and swung a single stroke. Thunk! The Gwynner's head popped off and rolled to the side as the body began to spout hot, sticky blood that coated the head. He looked over to Jeff and said, "Gotta be sure." The other boy looked up to him, tears in his eyes, and he said, "Gotta be sure." Looking around, he saw Paul scrambling to free the jammed round in a rifle he'd taken from the dead would-be sniper. Peter and Denise were trying to stop the bleeding on Bobby's shoulder, and Toby and Deborah were trying to help Donna. And that didn't look good. It was way too much blood. As he walked up to where the girl lay on the ground, he knelt down next to her. She frowned up at him and asked, "Did you kill it?" "It's dead," Lance told her. "Jeff shot it in the head, and I cut its head off." "She pushed me out of the way and got hit," Deborah said, near in tears. She looked at Lance and demanded, "Do something! Save her!" Kneeling down next to the injured girl, he peeked under what was left of Tommy's shirt. He could see the wound had cut her deep and saw the blue veins of internal organs. He felt helpless. This girl had put her trust in him, had put not only her safety, but the safety of her family as well in his hands, and he found them. Found them all. "There's nothing you can do," Donna said, seemingly to read his thoughts. "The odds were at least one of us was going to die. I'm just glad it wasn't Todd or one of my sisters. Just get them out of here safe and sound." She shivered once as her face began to relax. "Save her!" Deborah screamed at him, pounding his back with her fists. "You said you would protect us. We should have never gone with you." After a moment, he felt Tommy pulling her away from him as she broke down sobbing. Until his dying day, Lance would never forget the look on her face as she passed from this world to the next. A glow seemed to fade from her skin, a telltale sign that the vessel that was once Donna was now empty. For just a moment, Lance could have sworn he heard the sound of beating wings as a presence passed between them. He gently crossed her hands over her own wound, and then he looked over to where Bobby was sitting on the ground, wincing, as Peter used what was left of Bobby's own shirt to try and staunch the bleeding. Peter looked over at Lance and said, "It went all the way through his shoulder." "Claw?" Lance asked, standing and going over to the other 3. It was Denise who said, "Bite." Lance winced and squatted next to Bobby. Bobby was the second, or maybe third, depending on how you count them, person who had made friends with him when he moved to the Gulf City. Looking at the wound, he noted that it seemed to have been a single tooth all the way through his shoulder. What made it let go? "Jeff and that hand cannon," Bobby said. "If it hadn't been for him pumping that son of a bitch full of lead, I'd have been with my dad now." Lance winced at the reminder of the other deaths. The past few days had been a bloody tragedy that made absolutely no sense. Gwynner's, carnivorous Bigfoots, or was that big feats? His mind was a jumble of contradictions, and now snipers. By the way, thanks for saving my butt back there, he told Bobby. That was a freaking elephant gun he was firing. Like you said, it's what friends do. Before Lance could reply, he saw red and white flashing lights atop of a series of fire trucks come barreling down the road towards them. He stood up and told the other teens, "Get yourselves and the wounded out of the road." He picked up the rifle and the other weapons and tossed them aside as he stood in the middle of the road with his hands up. The lead truck came to a slow stop about 10 feet away from him. A firefighter in full gear stuck his head out of the window and demanded in a thick Kentucky accent, "What are you kids doing out here in the middle of the road? We've got a fire to put out." "Trying to stay alive, sir," Lance said. "What do you mean?" Lance plunged ahead. "I got 2 wounded, 1 dead, plus 1 enemy dead." "Dead? Enemy? Wounded? What are you talking about, boy? Who attacked you?" Lance stepped aside so the man could see the huge gwinner laying in the road without its head. "That thing killed one of the girls, plus 4 parents." He pointed over to the guy lying face down beside the road. "That one tried to shoot us. He missed and I shot him back." The driver grabbed the mic on his radio and called the chief and the paramedics up to find out what he was supposed to do. By the time the afternoon was ending, they were all on life flights to a hospital in Lexington. It took everything that the Office of Arcane Investigation could do to hide exactly what happened. In the end, it took Grandmother Kate threatening several people to let it lie and for the insurance companies to pay out. It seems that a Dubois name carries a lot of weight. After action report. Hunt number 16. Hunt masters, redacted, both deceased. Number of hunt judges, 2. Judges, redacted. Date of hunt, 197-80526-29. Memorial Day weekend. Number of specimens, 2. Specimens, Delta Mother / Golf Yankee -122. Serial Delta Mother - Golf Yankee 197-20215 and Golf Whiskey -127. Serial Golf Whiskey -2A1 976-1225. Location of hunt, Pike County, Kentucky. Purpose of hunt. To compare and contrast the hunting efforts, effectiveness and techniques of 2 different species of cryptid known colloquially as Dogman and Gugwe. Huntmaster's notes. Judges' notes. Operation a complete failure. Both huntmasters deceased, all useful data lost. Academy finally came through with information on Lance McKnight. He's been identified as a Witchkin and a 5th-generation descendant of the Dubois family. The Academy has issued a sincere apology to the Dubois family and has even offered them the heads of all members involved in the hunt. They have so far declined the offer. So far. McKnight has been placed on Do Not Approach status, as have the other children with him. The incident has been covered up as a mountain lion attack, forest fire, and hunting accident. It is my recommendation that a DNAS be removed from McKnight and a close study of him made. Covertly, of course. Wow. Absolutely awesome stuff, Wayne. Thank you so much for getting that over to me, and of course your patience. Well, as ever guys and girls, please do let us know down below in the comments what you thought. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel further and our community further. And of course, don't forget we're trying to smash our way through the 30,000 subscriber mark. We can only do that with your help. As ever, I hope you're all well and happy. And remember, above all, be safe, not sorry.